Thank you. That's all my questions. So for my substantive contribution, I just wanted to acknowledge that there is a housing crisis and that it is important that that is addressed. And once again, I would just like to express my disgust with the planning scheme, if I'm allowed.
Extreme disgust or just disgust? Thank you. Councillor Cordover.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to my colleagues for their contributions so far. I just want to point out that in this proposal, following the advertised period and preliminary feedback from Council regarding the density of this proposed development and the potential for retention of additional high conservation value trees, amended plans were submitted. These plans reduced the number of units by 4 to comply with the density requirements of the scheme and also enable the retention of an additional high conservation value tree number 610. So to reiterate, the application was lodged at 55 and the proponent, to their credit, showed a willingness to amend their plans to reduce the number of dwellings and that density. Also to save one high conservation value tree. I believe that one is the one potentially that's on council land on the significant tree register. The proposal had a density per unit of 302 metres squared, and the acceptable solution A1 requires 325. And in response to that issue of density that was raised by the council and the submissions, the application was amended to remove those 4 units, and now the minimum that's required is 325, and they've agreed to 326 metres squared per unit. And so on that, it complies with clause 10.4.1 according to the council officers. So what we're looking at here with this proposal is that 3,000 square metres of eucalyptus ovata forest and woodland will require removal. And the vegetation is a high priority under Table E 10.1 of the planning scheme, as it's listed as endangered. And we've heard a little bit about the Chaostola skipper, the skipper moth, and this is potential habitat foraging for endangered swift parrot as well. I couldn't find a population figure for the moth. It's very low, it's endangered. But this, as potential habitat for the swift parrot in the urban corridor, the swift parrot is rarer than the orangutan, it's rarer than the black rhino, the swift parrot is rarer than the panda. And it says on the Tasmanian Government website under the threatened species link, quote, urbanisation is the major cause of local extinctions of the Chaostola skipper. Many of those areas are now largely subdivided into small residential blocks. So that's the context around why it's important that we maintain habitat in urban areas for threatened and endangered species. There were 19 representations opposing this proposal. Things like traffic and pedestrian and cycling issues are noted, the usual issues that we often talk about, and the Mayor does a great job at raising the salience of this issue. Disability access. You know, we need to start building our communities to be universally accessible for everyone. It doesn't just benefit people living in the disability community, it benefits all people, you know, frail people, people pushing prams, of course. And yes, as we've heard on this and others, yes, this type of dwelling that's proposed does suit some families, and Kingborough does indeed, of course, need to be providing a range of housing stock, increasing the housing stock, and you can see that in the local area objectives, the implementation strategies, the future character statements all say this, that we need to be increasing density close to shops, we need to have multi-unit housing. But it's all about the type of multi-unit housing, isn't it? And it's all about to what extent we all announce our displeasure with the planning scheme, but we actually can't fix the planning scheme from this chamber. And yes, if the planning scheme is the bare minimum, the least we could expect of our proponents and the proposals that we assess, the least we could expect is that they will comply with the planning scheme. That's all we're asking, is that they comply. And the removal of trees in this circumstance does not comply with the planning scheme. At page 61, quote, provided the loss of 24 high conservation value trees is offset, the proposed development is therefore considered to meet the performance criteria. However, at page 67, it's based on performance criteria P1. Quote, A, it is demonstrated that there are no feasible alternative proposal designs which could be implemented to avoid impacting on the tree, and the proposed methodology of the works incorporates measures to minimise and mitigate any damage to the tree. So again, we're told by planning staff on this occasion that it does meet performance criteria P1 because there are apparently no feasible alternatives. But if we turn our attention to the map that's on, or the diagram rather, on page 82, for example, you can see that the majority of the high conservation value trees are in that middle section there, where the blue kind of stage 2 and stage 3 houses are. And again, I just simply don't accept the notion that every feasible opportunity was looked into. I respectfully disagree with the assessment that there is no feasible alternative to this proposal that could retain trees. By my view, an alternative exists. On page 82, you can see in that middle chunk of the proposed development, that's where you could save those trees. And you would just have to slightly amend the plans. But, you know, the proponent has chosen not to amend the plans. They only took away 4 of the proposed dwellings. And now we're left with 24 high conservation value trees to be taken away. So on 10.4.2 P4, the proponent has chosen not to comply, despite approving.
Time.
And so I will be voting against it. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further contributions? If not, I'll ask.
I have a question.
Oh,
Some more
sorry,
questions.
Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. In regards to what Councillor Cordover shared in regards to the trees and perhaps the possibility of retaining the middle section, I'm wondering if Ms Tyler Moore has any comments in regards to that.
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, unfortunately I wasn't in the discussions. I'd have to look at the file to see what the record was about discussions with respect to that middle part and the trees.
Mayor, that just
yes.
makes it difficult for me at the moment to be able to make a decision on this, to see if there could have been a possibility in regards to the retainment.
Well, we
of
have
this
to.
area, but
The issue that we have is that we have to consider the application that is before us at the moment. So it's sort of a hypothetical question in one sense. Ms Tyler Moore's not able to provide that detail as she wasn't the assessing planning officer. So unless you have another question, we need to... Oh, sorry. Ms Tyler Moore.
Sorry, through you, Mayor. I don't have an answer about whether there was a discussion about the middle part. Like I said, I have to look at the council records. But part of the discussion on page 66 that the officers included, the environmental officer is included in the report, does give some explanation as to why that the vegetation has been pushed really hard to be retained, which I can assure you does not come lightly to our environmental planners. They talk about the poor condition of the values, lack of management options. There's also the bushfire. So under the planning scheme, as the councillors would now be quite well aware of, there's a number of exemptions regarding vegetation removal. The exemptions at the front of the end of the scheme trump other parts of the planning scheme. So this is a bushfire site as well. It's a bushfire prone area, which whilst, just to complicate things, whilst we don't assess the bushfire unless it's subdivision in units, it will come up as the need to achieve BAL requirements under the building permit. So we proactively look at the bushfire requirements when we do the planning applications to know what will be cleared, and that does obviously have impacts on what can be retained in terms of vegetation.
thank you. Could I please just have some understanding and explanation then what that means, given the poor condition of the values, the lack of management options and the small size of the patch? If you could just expand on that a bit more for me, please, through you, Mayor.
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, I don't want to completely answer what the officers were looking at. I haven't read the supporting reports that went with it. Generally, the comments around that would be to do with the poor condition of the values. That may have something to do with the maturity, or how well they've grown, or whether they've been stunted over time, whether they have the ability to grow into a mature forest that's really going to offer that. I'm not saying that is the case for this. It comes with the disclaimer that I haven't read the environmental report that was supported with the application, but that is generally what we talk about, the condition of values. It might also to do with weed infestation or other damage that has occurred over time, because perhaps the area has been quite badly damaged in the past, which occurs on some sites where they've tilled the area and things like that in the past. The lack of management options and the small size of the patch. So they must see that, yes, you might have a patch, but is it really conducive to what they're trying to achieve if it's completely surrounded by urban environment around that? Is it enough to save it, or is it better to get the offset and spend it on an area where there will be a greater net value to the community, to Kingborough, by preserving those areas?
Any further questions, Councillor Midgley? No? Otherwise, Councillor Street, would you like to close the debate?
Only to say that I appreciate the contributions from my colleagues, but still believe that the proposal meets the requirements of the planning scheme, and I will be voting in favour of it.
Thank you. The motion is that it is a development application for 55 multiple dwellings and demolition of existing dwelling, including stormwater and sewer infrastructure, at 70 Channel Highway and 6 Breeza Court, Kingston, for All Urban Planning Proprietary Limited, and there are 23 conditions attached. It was moved by Councillor Street, seconded by Councillor Westwood. All those in favour? Against? Division required. All those in favour? All those in favour are Councillor Wass, Midgley, Gladewright, Fox, Street, Bastone, Westwood and Reet. Those against, Councillor Cordover. The motion is carried.
Mayor, for the record, it's 51 units. You mistakenly said 55.
Sorry, did I say 55?
You took it from the heading, not from the approval.
Beg your pardon. Thank you. Okay, the Planning Authority adjourns.